There are stories about illness, and then there are stories about love, written in silence, folded in paper, left behind for someone who might not know how to keep going. This isn't a story about pain. It's about a boy who knew he didn't have much time and used what little he had to write everything for her. This is what Arthur left behind, and what it taught us about remembering even when words are gone. It started with a whisper, not from the boy, but from the hallway. That soft murmur of sneakers against polished floor, that rhythmic roll of a clinic bag, the brief pause before the knock. Every Tuesday at 9:00 a.m., it was the same. He never ran. He never rushed. He just arrived, as if he had always been here. Arthur was 10, small-framed, freckled nose, the kind of child who didn't take up space, but somehow made the room notice him anyway. He walked in holding a cup of orange juice in one hand and a balled-up pair of socks in the other. He always forgot to wear them, always laughed about it. "I'll put them on next time, promise." He never did. I didn't mind. He wasn't like most patients I saw. He didn't ask how long the appointment would be. He didn't glance nervously at the blood pressure cuff or shy away from the needle tray. He just sat, legs dangling off the chair, sipping quietly, watching the light shift on the floor tiles. Most children his age looked for distractions. Arthur observed. "You changed your perfume," he said one morning without looking up from his juice. I blinked. It was true. I had switched to something milder that day, something with lavender. He didn't comment on the smell. He simply noticed and smiled. That Tuesday, I was running 10 minutes behind. When I finally opened the door, he was already inside. Not fidgeting, not frustrated, just sketching invisible shapes on the tabletop with one finger. His mother sat across the room, upright, proper, her bag in her lap like a shield. She always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be after this. But she never went anywhere. She never said much either. "Morning," I said softly. Arthur waved his socked hand. "I gave up on shoes today." I smiled. We went through the basics: vitals, reflexes, questions that should have made a child flinch. He didn't. Instead, he asked me something strange. "Do you think windows get lonely when they're closed too long?" I paused. "That's a lovely thought," I said. He nodded. "Some days the house feels quieter than it should." I glanced at his mother. She was staring at the bookshelf, not at him. That's when I noticed it. A small, spiral-bound notebook sitting on the tray beside Arthur's juice. It had a red elastic band, new, but a single page stuck out from the middle. Creased, slightly torn, folded once diagonally. Arthur didn't offer it to me. He didn't mention it at all. But when he went to the restroom, a routine he never skipped, precisely 5 minutes before the end of each session, he left the notebook behind. I didn't touch it, but I did glance. The title, scribbled in block letters on the cover, read, "For when I'm not there, not if, when." When he returned, the notebook was gone, back in his hands, tucked into his small backpack like it had never existed. He didn't look at me. He just said, "Do you think dreams have leftovers?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Like, when you wake up and something's still sticking to your chest, even if you forgot the dream." I nodded slowly. "I think so." "Good," he whispered. "Then maybe Mom doesn't have to remember everything at once." When he left that day, he waved like usual, no socks again. But this time, he turned back just before the door closed and smiled at me, not like a child who was curious, but like someone who already knew something I didn't, something that wasn't mine to know yet. There are children who speak in stories, and there are others who speak in signs. Arthur? He spoke in patterns. He never repeated a question, but every question he asked felt like it came from the same thread, a quiet, invisible logic only he understood. On his second Tuesday, he asked me where birds go when hospitals get too loud. I didn't answer. He didn't seem to need one. He just smiled, looked at the ceiling, and whispered, "Maybe they wait on the roof." I should have brushed it off, but I didn't. Something in the way he said it, light, almost playful, made me write it down. That afternoon, I went to the pediatric ward roof for the first time in months. There was no bird, just a single feather caught in the corner of the railing. I didn't know what I was looking for, but somehow, I knew he'd been right. The following week, he brought in a folded napkin. It was red, neatly creased into a triangle, like a flag. He handed it to me with both hands and said, "If Mom's late today, can you give this to her?" I nodded, thinking it was a drawing. But inside was a checklist written in his uneven, all-caps handwriting. "If Mom looks worried, tell her I already drank the juice. Say my stomach didn't hurt today. Remind her she has to smile 3 times before bedtime." No mention of pain, no fear, just instructions. Instructions for comfort. I asked him gently, "Why 3 times?" He tilted his head. "That's the number she used to do when Dad came home. Before." He never finished the sentence. I never asked him to. His mother always sat in the corner chair, not by the window, not by his side. The chair next to the sink, as far from the bed as the room would allow. She didn't hold his hand during blood draws. She didn't ask many questions, but she was always there, still, rigid, like a statue carved out of survival. And Arthur never seemed to mind. He never called her, never asked her to come closer. Instead, he spoke of her as if she were already in another room, or another part of the story. "She likes when people put lids on things. She doesn't eat on Tuesdays, so don't worry. She only hums when she's folding clothes." Each line came randomly, out of nowhere, during vitals, during waiting. But I was beginning to see what they were. Breadcrumbs. Not about his illness, not about fear, but about her, and how she would need help holding the pieces, if he couldn't stay. The red napkin wasn't the only note. Over the next 2 weeks, he started handing me tiny paper scraps folded in deliberate shapes, a rectangle, a diamond, once a swan. Inside each one was a single sentence. "She's afraid of loud clocks. She likes ginger tea but never buys it. Don't let her forget to wear shoes when she's sad." These weren't requests, they were reminders, for someone who wasn't ready yet, and maybe never would be. And every time he handed one over, he'd add something small. "Can you remember it for her? It's okay if she never sees it, as long as someone does. And once, it's not about me." That was the only time I felt a tear threaten to form, but I held it back, because he wasn't crying. He was building something, not a legacy, not a farewell, but a cushion, something soft enough for her to land on, if the world fell apart too soon. I used to pride myself on seeing what others missed, but Arthur didn't need me to see him. He needed me to hold space for all the things he wasn't saying, because what he was leaving behind wasn't a story about disease. It was a story about someone else's grief, and how a 10-year-old boy tried to make it just a little easier to bear. I used to believe that explanation could fix things, that if you could name the mechanism, the mutation, the stage, the fear would somehow shrink, that if you told someone what was happening in enough careful words, they'd feel less alone in it. That belief was broken long before I met Arthur, but I still clung to the habit. I spoke in lab markers and whiteboard diagrams. I outlined treatment plans like they were rescue maps. I used words like responsive and manageable because they were softer than uncertain or limited. I didn't lie. I just curated the truth until Arthur made that useless. He never asked for explanation. He never looked for comfort in big words or hopeful percentages. He never even blinked when I told him we'd be increasing his medication. He just tilted his head and said, "Is it still going to hurt in the morning?" I hesitated, then nodded. He nodded too, and that was it. No resistance, no questions, just understanding. The next Tuesday, he walked in carrying a book. Not a children's book, a hardcover encyclopedia of trees. It was too large for him. The corners were frayed. Inside, there were sticky tabs on nearly every other page. He placed it on the tray table. "Not all roots grow downward," he said. I looked at him. He opened the book to a chapter on banyan trees. "Some roots grow from the branches," he explained. "They look like they're falling, but really, they're reaching." He didn't need me to say anything, but I did. I said, "That's beautiful." He smiled, tapped a finger on the picture, and whispered, "That's what I want to be." I didn't understand, not fully. Not until that night, when I couldn't sleep. When I sat in my office and read every note he'd left me so far, every folded napkin, every origami scrap, every checklist that wasn't about him. And then I saw it, the pattern. He was preparing, not for himself, but for the one who'd stay, for the mother who didn't ask, who didn't look at charts, who never sat too close. She was grieving already. Arthur saw it, and instead of demanding more of her, he gave more to her, in ways so small they looked like nothing, unless you were paying attention. The next morning, I looked at my daughter's old sketchbook for the first time in 5 years. Her name was Ava. She had drawn a picture of me once, sitting on the floor, reading a file. She'd written underneath, "This is how Mom saves people. She reads them until they're not scared anymore." I had forgotten that page existed, forgotten how fiercely Ava believed I could make things better just by noticing. But Arthur, in his own quiet way, had been asking me to do the same thing, not to treat, not to explain, just to notice. So I stopped explaining. The next time Arthur came in, I didn't ask how he was feeling. I didn't point to charts. I didn't tell him we were adjusting the treatment. I simply said, "Did you bring anything today?" He nodded, pulled out a folded square of paper, placed it on the table like something sacred. Then he added, "It's not for you, but I need you to hold it for me." I didn't open it. Not then. He smiled. "Thanks for not asking." Later that day, in the quiet of the hallway, I opened it. Inside, a single line. "If she forgets how to smile, remind her about the blue house and the soup." No context, but I didn't need any, because for the first time since Ava died, I didn't want to explain anything either. I just wanted to remember what it meant to be someone who could still hold the little things for someone else, even when they didn't say them out loud, especially then. The first time I held Arthur's notebook, it felt heavier than it should. It wasn't the paper, it wasn't the size, it was the quiet weight of knowing it wasn't for me, not truly. He had slipped it into my hands at the end of a visit. No ceremony, no introduction. Just a soft, "Could you keep this somewhere safe?" Then he turned, walked away, and never looked back. I didn't open it that day, or the day after. I let it sit on the corner of my desk, spine facing outward, like a silent guest in the room. It took me 3 nights to even touch it again. And when I did, I expected drawings, doodles, maybe pressed flowers or folded jokes, the way some children leave breadcrumbs of themselves. But what I found was something else entirely. The first page was blank, the second too. The third had one sentence: "Things that make her less sad." Written in all capital letters with the S reversed, like a child younger than his age had written it, or maybe like someone trying to remember how to write gently. Beneath the title was a list, numbered, short, precise. 1. Open the window before she wakes up. 2. Don't let the fridge light stay on too long. 3. Her favorite spoon is the one with the small dent. I read it twice. It didn't make sense. Then again, it didn't need to. Because it wasn't about understanding. It was about remembering. Not facts, but comforts. Not symptoms, but survival cues. Page after page followed, each one filled with details so specific, so quietly intimate, it felt like peeking into a heart that had never been given permission to speak. She hums when peeling carrots. It means she's calm. She always folds the towel in thirds, not half. If the house smells like toast, she's trying not to cry. It wasn't a list for emergencies. It was a guide, a manual, a love letter disguised as instructions. And not once, not in 37 pages, did Arthur mention his illness. No mention of chemo, No record of pain, no countdowns or questions or fears. Only her habits, her rituals, her quiet ways of coping that no one else had noticed. But he did. I closed the notebook slowly. There were no words in me for a long time, just stillness. And the feeling that I had just touched something I wasn't meant to hold, but had been trusted to carry anyway. I thought of my own daughter then, of Ava, and the way she used to leave sticky notes for me on the fridge. Don't skip breakfast. Take off your badge before hugs. Don't wear the sad sweater to work. I used to think they were silly. Now I wonder if they were her way of leaving pieces of herself behind, just in case I ever forgot how to keep going. The next time I saw Arthur, I didn't mention the notebook. He didn't ask. Instead, he held out a new napkin, folded into a star. Inside was just one line: ask her to buy cinnamon again. No context. But somehow, I understood. So I wrote it down on a sticky note and placed it inside my own wallet. Not for her, but for me. Because some reminders aren't just about helping others remember. Sometimes they're about helping ourselves not to forget the little ways someone we love tried to stay, even while they were gently letting go. That evening, I stayed behind in the staff room. The cleaning lights buzzed overhead. The chairs were all empty. The floor smelled faintly of lemon and metal. I opened the notebook one more time. This time, I copied the entire list, line by line, not onto the computer, not for the patient file, just onto paper. My hand wrote slower than usual, deliberate, careful. I wanted the words to leave an imprint, to live somewhere more permanent than memory. Because whether Arthur knew it or not, he wasn't just preparing his mother. He was teaching me how to remember softly, how to see someone through the things they leave behind, how to stay, even when you can't. And as I turned off the lights, I thought about the very first thing he ever asked me. Do you think windows get lonely when they're closed too long? I do now. It began with silence. Not the kind I was used to from Arthur. Not the soft, curious kind that floated between us like a shared breath. This was different. It was the kind of silence that presses into your chest before your mind catches up. A silence that doesn't belong. He was late that morning. 8 minutes, then 15. Enough for me to feel it in the back of my throat. His mother walked in first. Alone. No bag, no notebook, no apology. Just her. Tense, breathless, eyes not meeting mine. Then a nurse wheeled Arthur in. He was sitting upright, but slouched. His eyes were open, but not quite focused. And his left hand kept twitching. Rhythmic, involuntary. He didn't say anything. Not even hello. Not even a smile. Vitals were erratic. Blood pressure slightly elevated. Pulse weak, but steady. No fever, no vomiting. But he kept pressing his palm to his forehead. When I asked if it hurt, he nodded. Once, slowly. He looked at me, really looked, and whispered, "It's too full today." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer, just reached for the window, that tiny, rectangular slit behind the exam table. It didn't open far, maybe 3 inches if that. But he tried. Fingers trembling, arms weak, he pulled it outward until the lock clicked. Then he leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing deeper, as if something had been waiting on the other side of the glass. And now, finally, it could enter. His mother watched all this without saying a word. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't move toward him. She stood frozen, like if she didn't step closer, nothing serious could happen. When I turned to her and said, "We need to monitor for possible intracranial pressure," she blinked, once, then nodded. She didn't ask what it meant, just sat down in the chair, far away, as always. We moved him to the observation room, hooked up IV fluids, prepped labs, still no fever, still no vomiting. But his eyes kept closing, flickering like film stuck on a frame. I sat beside him for hours, didn't leave, didn't document. I just watched the rise and fall of his chest, listened to the occasional whisper. It's too loud in here. The light hurts behind my eyes. Tell her I'm still okay. She hadn't come in to see him, not once since we wheeled him down. But Arthur, he still said her, like she was in the room. At dusk, the nurse brought in a heated blanket. Arthur stirred slightly, eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, and for the first time in hours, he smiled. Faint, crooked, but real. Then he whispered, "Can we keep the window open, just for tonight?" I hesitated. That window was nothing, a slit of air, barely ventilation. But I nodded. "Yes," he exhaled, like something inside him had finally relaxed. And then, before closing his eyes, he said, "That way, if she forgets how to breathe, the air will remember for her." I left the room before I cried, not because I was weak, but because I had forgotten what that felt like, being spoken to by someone who wasn't asking to be saved, but asking me to save someone else, someone who still couldn't look at her son without bracing for the end. That night, I sat in my car long after the engine had cooled. I stared at the hospital's fifth-floor windows. Only one was open, slightly, but enough for the curtains to shift, as if something invisible had passed through. That was the moment I remembered something I had buried. My daughter, Ava, once had a fever that wouldn't break. She was 5. I was on call. Her father had rushed her in before I could leave the OR. When I arrived, she was already asleep, hooked to fluids, wrapped in that same hospital blue. I sat beside her bed, hands clenched, and I said nothing. I didn't ask if she was okay. I didn't whisper, "I love you." I just watched the numbers on the monitor, like they were the only language I trusted. Later that night, a nurse told me she'd woken up briefly, looked around and asked, "Why didn't Mommy open the window? It's too heavy in here." I had forgotten that, until now, until Arthur, until his breathy whisper in a dark room, "If she forgets how to breathe." Now I understand. He wasn't just preparing his mother to lose him. He was trying to leave behind something that still moved, something that still opened, even after he was gone. A window, a breath, a reason. And for the first time in years, I sat in silence that didn't scare me. Because now, I knew what it meant to leave something open, even if no one walks through. He handed me the notebook on a Wednesday. Not a Tuesday like usual. Not at the end of an appointment, not after one of his quiet, folded notes, just there, in the hallway, after a lab draw. It was worn now, corners bent, elastic band faded, but it was heavier. I don't mean in weight, I mean in presence. It felt like something settled had been placed in my hands. Arthur didn't say anything, just looked up at me and whispered, "Don't open it now. Not yet. Just when you feel it." Then he turned and walked away. That was the last time he stood on his own. The following day, he collapsed during morning rounds. No warning, no cry, just a soft thud against the tile, like something gently folding in on itself. The scans came back fast. Edema, increased pressure, small hemorrhages, no surgery recommended. Not at this stage. The words came from another specialist, sterile and practiced. Best to manage for comfort now. I knew what that meant. I'd said it myself, years ago, to a different mother, to myself. Arthur didn't speak for the first 24 hours. He drifted in and out, mostly asleep, barely stirring when touched. His mother never left the chair, but this time she sat closer, close enough to hold his hand, though she never did. She just hovered, fingers above his wrist, like a pianist afraid to strike the first note. I didn't disturb them. There was nothing I could explain anymore, only wait, and hold the weight of a notebook I hadn't dared to open. On the third night, his eyes opened, wide, clear, focused. I was reviewing labs in the hallway when the nurse waved me in. "He's asking for you." I entered quietly. He was propped on a pillow, face pale, lips dry, but his voice was steady. "Is it time?" I didn't know what he meant. He did. "The notebook," he said. "You can open it now." So I did. Hands trembling, I peeled back the cover I had touched a dozen times before. Pages flipped. Familiar lists, familiar details, the quiet documentation of someone preparing the world to keep moving. But at the very back, tucked inside the cover, was a folded page. Not torn, not creased like the others. New, thicker paper, blue ink, and a title written in smaller, softer handwriting. "If I Forget to Smile." I read it once, then again, then sat down beside his bed. I asked, "Would you like me to read it to her?" He shook his head, then whispered, "No, to me, just once, just in case." So I read, "If I forget to smile, tell her it wasn't because I was scared. It's because I was tired, and tired is okay. If she forgets how to eat alone, leave out the bowl with the stars. She'll know what it means. If she forgets how to laugh, play the music from the car ride to Grandma's, not the good one, the broken one, the tape with the clicking sound. If she asks if I knew, say no, because knowing and saying are different. If she asks if I loved her, say always, but only once." I stopped there. His eyes had closed, not in sleep, not in finality, just resting, but I could see it. His lips trying to shape something, a word maybe, or just a release. I leaned forward and whispered, "She'll remember, all of it." He didn't reply, but his fingers twitched once, twice, against the blanket, the same rhythm he used for everything else. Tap, tap. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a goodbye in the way adults expect. It was an offering, a small, fragile bridge between the world he was leaving and the one we would have to keep walking through, without him. I stayed with him until morning. His mother slept in the recliner, half sitting, half curled, one hand still inches from his. When the sun came up, I opened the window, not because the room needed air, but because it felt wrong to leave it closed. And when I stepped out, the notebook still in my hand, I knew something inside me had shifted, not just as a doctor, but as someone who had forgotten what it meant to hold someone's trust at the edge of the unspeakable. Arthur didn't need saving. He needed someone to carry what he couldn't anymore, and somehow, that someone was me. She never asked what page I had read. She never asked how long he had been preparing it, or when he had started, or how much I already knew. She just held the notebook with both hands, not clutching it, not trembling, just holding, like it was a child, like it was what remained. And maybe, in some way, it was. Arthur passed 2 nights later, quietly, no struggle, no final words, just breath that slowed, then faded, until the silence didn't need to announce itself. The machines didn't wail, the room didn't rush. It was as if the world, just for that moment, had agreed not to interrupt. I was the one who told her. She didn't cry, didn't lean forward, didn't collapse or cover her mouth. She simply closed her eyes, breathed once, sharp, then opened them again, and said, "Thank you." Not for the care, not for the news, for something else, something I hadn't known how much I needed to hear. She left the hospital with a small canvas bag. Inside, Arthur's notebook, one pair of red socks with holes, and the last juice cup he never drank from. No teddy bear, no photographs, no condolences, only the things he left with purpose, only what she was meant to carry. I didn't see her for a while after that. Hospitals have a strange way of turning memories into echoes. You pass a room, and someone else is in the bed. You hear a laugh that almost sounds like his. You pick up a folder and realize your hand still expects a note to fall out from between the pages. Grief in medicine doesn't arrive like it does for others. It lingers in the margins, quiet, professional, tolerated. But that week, I found myself unable to touch the chair he always sat in. Couldn't adjust it. Couldn't let another child lean back against it without feeling like something sacred had been erased. So I let it sit, just one day longer. Then one morning, I stepped into the waiting room to grab a file, and she was there. Not sitting, not waiting, standing near the window holding a folded sheet of paper. She didn't turn when I entered, just said, "I found something." She handed it to me. It wasn't from the notebook. It was from her. One page, handwritten, neat but unsure. The kind of handwriting people use when they're afraid they're saying too much. The title read, "What I Forgot to Tell Him." And beneath it, I knew he was preparing me. I just didn't know how to show him I saw it. He never asked me to be strong, but I think he knew I would pretend. I didn't forget to say goodbye. I just didn't know how to say it before he did. He always tapped twice, and I always heard it like a clock. But now, I think it was a rhythm, like a breath trying to remind me, I'm still here. I looked at her. She met my eyes. And for the first time, in all those weeks, I saw someone who wasn't bracing anymore. I saw a mother. Not broken, not okay, but beginning. She didn't ask what came next. She just said, "Can I leave this somewhere?" I nodded, led her to the shelf by the garden window, the same place where I had once hidden my daughter's drawing, the place I had come to think of as a kind of quiet altar, not to grief but to continuation. She placed the letter gently beside a small stone, then turned to leave. As she reached the door, I called out, not loudly, just enough. "He wanted you to keep smiling, but he didn't mean all the time." She paused, then answered, "I know." And then, "I'm just learning how to let it not be a lie." That night, I sat in the empty office long past my shift. I pulled out my own notebook, one I hadn't written in since Ava, and I started a new page. Things they leave that don't fade. It wasn't a list, not yet, just a space I was ready to fill. Because sometimes the people we treat aren't asking us to fix them, they're asking us to stay long enough to see what they leave behind, and maybe to help someone else carry it forward, even if they never ask why. There are notebooks that live on shelves, some never opened, some only half filled, some forgotten behind folders and forms collecting the slow dust of time. Mine was under a locked drawer, third from the bottom, back corner, wrapped in a scarf that still smelled faintly of the hospital laundry detergent I never liked. I hadn't touched it in years. Not since Ava. Not since the last thing I wrote. 5 pages of medical terms I used as a wall between what was happening and what I couldn't say. After that, silence felt safer. Until Arthur. Until a boy handed me his own notebook, not as confession, not as legacy, but as something softer. A tool for someone he loved, a mirror for someone who would forget, and unintentionally, a map for me. It took 3 weeks, 3 Tuesdays, 3 empty chairs in room 14B. Then, one morning, I walked in early, earlier than the nurses, earlier than the light. I sat down at my desk, unlocked the drawer, unwrapped the scarf, and opened my notebook. It creaked when it bent. The kind of quiet resistance that belongs to paper left untouched for too long. I didn't start with a title, just a sentence. He didn't ask me to remember, but I will. Then another. She didn't ask for my voice, but I gave it. And then, I didn't ask to be changed, but I was. I wrote for 20 minutes. No medical terms, no case numbers, no dates. Only memories. Arthur's socks, the napkin shaped like a swan, his mother's list titled, "What I Forgot to Tell Him." The window, the smile that almost wasn't, the tap, tap. Each one found a line, each one found a place. And when I closed the notebook, I didn't lock it away. I placed it in my coat pocket, because now it wasn't something I was afraid to carry. It was something I wanted to. That afternoon, I visited the pediatric wing garden. There, tucked between the wind chime and the koi pond, sat a small plaque I hadn't noticed before. Not from the hospital, from someone else. It read, "He didn't need to speak to be understood." In memory of A.B., I stood there longer than I should have. Then I sat on the stone bench nearby, hands in my lap, notebook still in my pocket, eyes following a single leaf spinning slowly in the wind. And I thought, maybe this is what grief looks like when it has been carried well, not erased, not solved, but shared, held, written down, so the silence doesn't take it all. A week later, a new patient arrived, 7 years old, anxious, withdrawn, didn't speak much. His mother sat close, too close, answering for him even when he didn't need her to. I watched them from across the room, not judging, just noticing. When the session ended, I knelt beside the boy, offered him a small blank page and a crayon. "Anything you want," I said, "even if it's nothing." He didn't answer, but he took the crayon and scribbled 2 dots, then tapped twice on the paper. Tap, tap. His mother didn't notice, but I did. And I smiled, because I knew now how to listen when no one is speaking. I knew now how to write it down. Not for the file, not for the treatment plan, but so that when the questions came, the ones we couldn't answer, we'd still have something to hold. Arthur never said goodbye, he just left pages. And now, I think that's what we're meant to do too. Leave something behind, not in grand gestures, but in the little things. A window cracked open, a spoon with a dent, a note folded in someone else's pocket. Proof that we were here, that we noticed, that we remembered the people who didn't ask us to, but hoped we would anyway. Some stories end with a closure, some with a lesson, and others, they end with a page left blank on purpose, so someone else can write the next line. Weeks passed. Room 14B welcomed a new patient, another child, another story. But the air still held traces of Arthur, in the way the window never quite stayed closed, in the way nurses paused when folding a blanket, as if remembering someone who used to smooth it twice. I kept the notebook with me, not in my drawer, not on a shelf, but in my satchel, next to the stethoscope I no longer used as often. It wasn't for reference, it was for reminder of what it meant to stay, to notice, to carry what someone else leaves behind, not because it's yours, but because they trusted you with it. One afternoon, I saw a boy sitting by the koi pond, thin, pale, drawing circles on his knee with a finger. His mother stood near the railing, speaking with another physician. The boy looked up at me, didn't speak, but his hand moved. One tap, pause, another tap. I smiled, then sat beside him, offered a page, a pen. He didn't write, but he watched me open my notebook, turn to the very last blank page, and write, "You don't have to know the ending to begin." I tore it out, folded it once, placed it in his lap. He looked down, then nodded. Small, but certain. That was enough. Later that night, I wrote something new, not in the notebook, but in a letter, with no name, no return address, just 3 words at the top, for who stays. Inside, I wrote what Arthur had taught me, what Ava had once tried to teach me, what grief had buried, and what kindness had restored. This world will forget your chart, your dosage, your vitals, but it won't forget the way you opened the window, the way you held silence like a language, the way you looked at someone like they mattered, even when they said nothing at all. Then I folded it, left it on the shelf by the garden window, right beside her letter, and his. We don't always get to choose who stays, but we can choose what we stay for each other, for the echoes, for the stories that end not with the last breath, but with the first moment someone else begins to remember. Thank you for listening. You for